Sony recently announced at their E3 press conference that a Shadow of the Colossus remake is coming to PS4 next year, and honestly, just seeing how awesome it looked really made me want to go back and review the original game. Now, I know everyone ever has already raved about this game, like, more than 10 years ago, and so no one really needs Shadow of the Colossus review anymore, and in writing and recording this, I'm wasting hours of my life that I can never get back for absolutely no reason whatsoever, but I didn't get a chance to talk about this game way back when it first came out. Before I start gushing about this game, just a quick note. This is going to be more of a broad review of Shadow of the Colossus. I'll be going over and evaluating things like gameplay, art direction, atmosphere, that kind of thing, a traditional review. This is going to be largely spoiler-free as well, aside from some super early game stuff. But if you're a huge nerd like me and you're interested in a deeper analysis, there will be an extremely spoilery analysis video for Shadow of the Colossus in the near future, where I'll talk about why it's so great, just some of the interesting and unique storytelling strategies it uses, stuff like that. Anyway, that's enough of my rambling. Hopefully I didn't lose everyone by this point. Without further ado, let's just take a look back at the original Shadow of the Colossus for PS2 and PS3 and see why I, for one, am so excited for the release of this gorgeous remake. Shadow of the Colossus doesn't really fit into a genre. Does it have puzzles? Yes. Are there platforming elements? Kinda. Is it a puzzle platformer? No, not even close. Instead, this is a game that really can't properly be described using the terms we generally use to classify video games. It's kind of its own unique genre, although I suppose it does bear a lot of tonal and stylistic similarities to Team Ico's other two games, Ico and The Last Guardian, both of which I would also recommend you play because they're so freaking awesome and beautiful, and I don't care what you say, Internet, The Last Guardian was great! Anyway, my own personal salt towards the critical reception of The Last Guardian aside, Shadow of the Colossus is a pretty unique game. In fact, honestly, it's best experienced blind and without expectations for what it should be. In its most basic sense, Shadow of the Colossus is just a series of 16 boss fights separated by segments of traveling to these sometimes frustratingly well-hidden fights. That's it. There will be no NPCs, no lengthy cutscenes, or very few lengthy cutscenes, and no side quests. Well, unless you count hunting down and killing these random lizards around the overworld, which, trust me, is not the best way to experience this game. Anyway, despite a lack of lengthy cutscenes, the ironic twist is that possibly the best part of this game is its story. Speaking of which, quick side note, do not skip the intro cutscene. Seriously, this is one of only 2 major cutscenes in this entire game, and I don't know why you can skip it, but skipping this key cutscene is something I've seen ruin the game for a few people I've shown it to. Got it? Don't skip it. Just don't. Thank you. Anyway, the story's impact is difficult to explain without giving away too much, as it really develops as you play the game. Despite a lack of cutscenes, you, the player, will have plenty of time to figure out the story for yourself. If you play with your eyes closed, metaphorically of course, please don't actually play this game with your eyes closed, you'll miss the beautiful everything, but if you're not paying any attention, you'll get a fairly basic story of a boy on a journey to save a loved one, with maybe an interesting twist at the end, but nothing to write home about. But, if you really pay attention while you're playing, you may notice that sometimes things just don't seem quite right. For example, the dissonance between what should be the triumphant moment of completing one of the 16 aforementioned boss fights and the solemn tone of the cutscene that plays after you do so can be haunting. Without spoiling any more of the game, I just want to impress upon you that moments like the ones I just described are what makes this game possibly the best example to date of the less is more, show don't tell, environmental style of storytelling we're starting to see crop up in more and more games like Inside or Portal, even more than a decade after Shadow of the Colossus' original PS2 release. And that segues perfectly into what may be the second most controversial design choice in the game, after the control issues I'll get to in a minute, but also a big reason why the game is so brilliant: the vast but largely empty overworld. Much to the disappointment of many very vocal gamers, this open world is barren. I mean, completely, absolutely barren. There are no secrets, other than the aforementioned stupid lizards to shoot, if you want to, I guess. Don't know why you would. But other than that, there's nothing other than your 16 colossal goals. And that's perfect. The sections of the game where you go about exploring these largely soundless atmospheres are strangely calming. They encourage you as the player to think about what you're doing, to a degree that I've never seen matched in any other game that I've played. You'll feel alone, you'll feel hopeless, you'll feel sad, but mostly you'll feel as if you're a trespasser in a strangely sacred place. And it's as unsettling as it is amazing that this feeling is able to overcome you without the game indicating that you should feel anything at all through on-screen text or cutscenes. But honestly, let's be real here, no one wants to play a game to run around in an empty overworld, regardless of how awe-inspiring and beautiful that overworld may be. The real meat of this game is found in the fights against the intimidating Colossi, and boy do they deliver. Let me just get off my artsy high horse here and just tell you straight up, regardless of all the depth of the story or innovative storytelling techniques utilized in the gameplay of these fights is simply stunning. As a huge fan of games like those in the Legend of Zelda series, I've had an amazing amount of sheer fun solving these monsters, much the same way I might solve a puzzle in a Legend of Zelda game. Except honestly, these puzzles are far more gratifying to solve than anything I've ever experienced in Zelda. The first few fights are mostly just there to get you on solid ground with the controls, and thus are fairly basic. Find a way to grab onto your enemy, climb onto the glowing weak point on its head, hit it with your sword until it falls over, and magical black tendrils of death come out of the dead body to chase you down, and then you fall over, and I guess you black out for a bit, and you wake up back at the temple for some reason. Look, this is a really weird game, but like any good game, once it teaches you the basics, it begins to throw you surprises and twists on these mechanics. As you progress through the game, you may find yourself up against monsters that swim, or that soar. The game may even catch you off guard the first time you see a Colossus that's merely the size of a bear instead of like a skyscraper. But it's all intentional. Everything, and I mean just about everything, that you believe to be formulaic about these fights will be overturned. Soon, weak points won't just be on the head. They'll be on the head and the back, or just the back, or somewhere else. And even the process of finding a way to grab onto these behemoths becomes more and more of a challenge as you move through the game, to the point that the last few bosses really made me think outside the box, more than most any other puzzle game out there. And yet somehow, though the puzzles were difficult and required outside-the-box thinking, the developers rarely fell into the trap of making the solutions too obtuse. Throughout my entire experience, there was really only one Colossus whose solution didn't feel extremely satisfying once I wrapped my mind around the answer. Nothing beats the feeling of figuring out how to get onto a lot of the later Colossi, which at first seem unclimbable. Your adrenaline is pumping in anticipation of the home stretch of the battle. You feel that gratification that only comes with having solved a particularly well-crafted puzzle. And as you grab on, the music changes into such an epic-sounding composition that alone feels like a reward for solving the puzzle. Seriously, the soundtrack in this game, it's top-notch. In fact, I'm just going to pause the review here and let the soundtrack speak for itself. Seriously, just listen to this music. How could you be listening to this music and not feel like a badass? Just like listening to it, it makes me want to play through the entire game again. It's so good. The music in this game is good. Sorry, I went off on a little tangent there about the music because it's really good, but this is technically still the gameplay section of the review, so getting back to the puzzles I was talking about before, the sheer number of aha moments in the puzzles in this game, if nothing else, should be enough to propel you along your journey to its oh-so-satisfying conclusion. And speaking of the ending, it is legitimately one of gaming's finest. So worth it. Just experience it for yourself. You don't want me to spoil it here, so that's all I'm going to say about it. But enough gushing over this game. If there's one thing that everyone universally hates about this game, it's the control scheme. I've been putting it off for long enough, so let's delve into the minefield that is this game's control scheme. I've got so many mixed feelings regarding this game's controls. It is definitely by far this game's biggest stumbling block, especially when viewed through the lens of modern day games where we pretty much have the camera controls figured out by now, even in the most mediocre of experiences. Anyway, the button layout is very odd, and a lot of people I showed this game to have immediately been turned off by the weird positioning of the buttons. I personally never had any real trouble with the buttons, but it seemed like it should be noted. Now, as far as the camera, I have two separate opinions. One thing I love about the camera is how disoriented and confused, often even obscured by particle effects it gets when your character is right next to a Colossus. I could actually see this turning off some gamers, but honestly this really served to drive home the idea that your character, as well as who may aim a bow or swing a sword, is not in a game like God of War. He is not invincible. He doesn't feel unattainable. He feels like some regular Joe with a ridiculous task set before him, which he believes is just as impossible as the player would given the same circumstances. This is one of many aspects of this game that really allows you to sympathize with your character, better than basically any other game out there. It's a special kind of synergy, and it's absolutely beautiful. It motivates you to get up and try again. That being said, the way the camera automatically snaps back to looking at the Colossus if you so much as almost let go of the right stick for so much as a fraction of a second is unnecessarily frustrating. I get that it's trying to highlight the grandness and the epicness of each of the 16 Colossi, and honestly the angles it forces you into really do a good job of capturing that, but it's not worth making the player feel like he is not in control of the game. Honestly, I felt like I was wrestling against the game itself almost as often as I felt like I was wrestling against the actual Colossi. I eventually got used to it, but it's definitely got a learning curve, an unnecessary learning curve at that, and playing back through it more recently, it's even more apparent than it was the first time I played. It's pretty bad. In addition, like the camera controls, the graphics of this game have aged extremely poorly with time. I mean, I normally don't really care about the graphics of the game as much as I look to the art style, how it's implemented, and how it complements the other aspects of the game, all of which Shadow of the Colossus nails, by the way. In fact, I used to have a blog called Gameplay Over Graphics, where that was literally our only defining feature. But the graphics of the PS2 version are more than a bit rough. They may have been cutting edge on the PS2, but today they just really don't stack up. Seriously, they're a huge eyesore, especially on an HD TV, like most of us are going to have today, so do yourself a favor, get the PS3 version if you want to be able to play it and actually see what you're doing. You can thank me for this later. Also, they've mostly fixed the camera issues in this version, so if you play on PS3, you really do get the better experience, and it's like $10 at this point, so seriously, just play the PS3 version, it's way better. Overall, I went into this game a number of years ago on the PS2 with as few preconceived notions as possible, and it ended up remaining my favorite game of all time to this day. The PS2 definitely struggles with its graphical payload as it combines blurry images with slow frame rate, even when not being presented on an HD screen, which only makes the issue worse. But I'm focusing on the game and how it plays, rather than how it would look if you played the wrong version on the wrong TV. Get the PS3 version or use an older TV, and the experience is full of beautiful art direction and intricate puzzles. It'll make you feel ecstatic, as you conquer beasts which tower over you, but at the same time uneasy. Before long you'll have plenty to contemplate as you journey through the fantastical lost world of Shadow of the Colossus. And you may end up with a more complex mix of emotions than you had when you were first starting out. Feelings like regret, despair, and yet also determination and desperation. It's an emotional roller coaster that never stops going, even through the end credits. In short, I absolutely love Shadow of the Colossus, and recommend it to anyone who's a fan of puzzle-based games like Zelda or Portal, like I mentioned before, or a fan of games with interpretive narratives like Inside or Journey. Don't miss this game for the world. Hey, while you're there, why don't you like this video and subscribe to Psyche for more reviews like this in the future. I'll also be releasing a deeper analysis of Shadow of the Colossus soon, so you won't want to miss that. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, or if you didn't, please feel free to tell me about it in the comment section below. Thanks for watching.